The creation of Iridium and introduction. Iridium began as a project under the supervision of Motorola as an attempt to become a major competitor in the space and communication sphere. And as well as the space and communication sphere, they wanted to become competitors in defense contracting as well. The service consisted of 66 low Earth orbit satellites that formed a sophisticated network providing satellite communications to subscribers. And the low Earth orbit satellites is an important detail to Iridium's story because there's different types of satellites, and the ones they chose led to different issues. And the analysis and development of the Iridium project began internally at Motorola in 1987, which was in their Strategic Electronics Division in the R&D group. And the final satellite communication service was launched on November 1st, 1998.
Cost and financing. The cost of the Iridium network was estimated to be $3.5 billion. The capital cost consists of two components. The first component deals with the space system contract for the design, development, production, and the delivery of satellites into orbit. The second component consists of the terrestrial network development contract, which is used to design the gateway hardware and software. The capital raised by Iridium was used to make payments to Motorola under the space contract. While some payments were paid by Iridium within the allotted schedule, Iridium still had pending payments to fulfill. With this being said, according to Craig Mello, by 1999, Iridium was bankrupt. Facts, service/management. Motorola launched satellites into orbit and initiated service November 1st, 1998. Because of the amount of satellites, Motorola decided to design a more efficient production process. Assembly line production allowed for up to 10 satellites to be assembled at one time. Edward Statiano was appointed as Iridium's CEO and vice chairman in 1996. Statiano personified the hardball and controlling leadership that resulted in a troubled year at Motorola. Vacations were banned, and only 2 independent contractors received compensation, while others received nothing.
Now let's get a little bit background on Motorola and Kyocera. So let's talk about Motorola first. So Motorola was first founded by Paul Galvin and Joseph Galvin, and then the name Motorola was given by Paul Galvin, and he got this idea from motion and radio. During 1947, Motorola became very popular, and that's when they decided to officially give the name Motorola to the company. Motorola's sale increased by 1999, and the revenue was over 30.9 billion. Now let's talk about Kyocera. Kyocera was founded by Dr. Kazuo and his colleagues, and after about more than 4 decades, Kyocera became more advanced and famous in technology. Kyocera was first in Japan to have overseas facilities. Kyocera revenue was 6.14 billion around 1999. Both company Motorola and Kyocera gained more popularity, and their sales increased more by around same time, 1999.
Due to the demand for mobile satellite telephones, Iridium had competitors that included the largest MSS companies such as Globalstar, Teledesic, and ICO Global Communications. One of the leading suppliers to the satellite industry was Stephen Dorfman, and he predicted that there would be 25 million satellite mobile telephones in use by the 21st century, as well as its use for voice, data, fax, and email communications on terrestrial and satellite systems. For Globalstar, the investment in the company totaled $3.8 billion, and investors included Qualcomm, France Telecom, and AirTouch. Globalstar targeted providing domestic service to developing countries and unwired regions. Their service was cheaper and simpler than Iridium's, but limited to land locations, and their focus was on wealthy business executives who needed to cover areas where their phones would not work. Teledesic was a company where they planned to deliver a web of two-way connections that could send data at a rate of 24 megabits per second through global network. However, analysts were concerned about high-speed data communications to remote areas. Investors in this company included Bill Gates, Saudi Prince, Abu Dhabi Investment Company, Boeing, and Motorola, as well as the Teledesic chairman, Craig McCaw. So, ICO Global Communications initially started out with $4.5 billion and was London-based. However, they were originally designed to deliver global telecom services, but after a failed attempt to save money by reducing the number of satellites, they filed for bankruptcy. Teledesic then planned to invest in new ICO and focus its goals on voice and data communications, in which it would be linked with Teledesic to provide Internet in the Sky satellite communication services.
Hello, this is Shabnam, and I'll be talking a little bit about the market reaction and new CEO and some service problems that they were facing. So by the end of 1998, many financial analysts had buy recommendation for Iridium. The estimated 2005 revenue for Credit Suisse's First Boston was $6.9 billion, while Merrill Lynch, who helped fund Iridium's IPO, projected around $6 billion. Solomon Smith Barney gave many reasons as to how Iridium presented clear investment opportunities and why people should invest their money. But unfortunately, Iridium's shares sank from a high of $72 in 1998 to $9 in 1999. And that was one of the reasons why John Richardson, who had previously led Iridium's Africa division, took over as interim CEO after Stiano left as the company's CEO in April 1999. John Richardson made many cost-cutting decisions to turn the company around. One of which was the company went from being a rival to cellular service to supplemental satellite services and specialized markets like ships and oil rigs was the main focus. He also, due to the fact that the network orbited above the Earth and would not be impacted by any issues on Earth's surface, so the firm made it an effort to position its phones as a Y2K insurance policy.
Issues: satellite problems. Iridium utilized low Earth orbit satellites, which were cheaper to construct and launch in comparison to geostationary satellites, which were about $100 million to construct and then another $10 million to launch. But they posed critical issues relating to inter-satellite communication. The satellites used by Iridium flew at over 15,000 miles per hour, which led to poor tracking and thus inconsistent inter-satellite communication. And in comparison to how geostationary satellites work, geostationary satellites are at a fixed point in space, which makes them much more easier to track. And in addition to the unreliable communication, Iridium satellites only provided a band for transmitting data of up to 2.4 kilobits, which was very low by modern standards. And their competition at the time was using satellites that provided about 9.6 kilobits of band. So the satellite problems were a major issue for Iridium at the time.
So one of the main service issues that they faced was they sold the service before all the testing and debugging was completed. Since Motorola was the main contractor, the system had to be delivered by December 1998. They were able to successfully develop a new system, manufacture, and deploy by the deadline, but failed to test and debug the 20 million lines of code. When the service issues arose, as a result of inefficient testing, the exposure was catastrophic, causing some spectators to believe that the service was powered on too soon.
So now we are going to talk about the initial market response to Iridium. So Iridium did a campaign with a slogan called Freedom to Communicate and spent about $140 million for this campaign. They had a huge budget and they spent like $140 million. and their ad was that they can transmit messages to any time and to anyone. It's Even though their message was like anytime to anyone, but it had a lot of limitations. The first of all, the messages, it was designed to it was not designed to work on urban areas, and also along with that, it could only handle like 1100 calls at a time. It wouldn't handle more than that. And also Iridium subscriber base and revenue was slower than expected. Whatever their plan was, it didn't go as planned.
As big and as grand as Iridium was, it did have its downfall. It was spending a lot of money. Iridium was overspending on less adequate, less efficient equipment, such as spoken in the prior slides. But that their financial hits, they just triggered the main actual downfall of the company, because their share prices originally were at the $50 mark and it dropped all the way down to $6, and that worsened Iridium's financial state completely. And as they defaulted on their substantially large amount of they continue to grow. The debt continued to grow like by every quarter, and it caused them to eventually file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And without any buyers, any rescuers such as Motorola backed out because they were losing millions and they did not want any part of Iridium whatsoever. So their mass accumulated debt just kept getting worse and worse. And a big time investor known as Macaw, who's known for saving these big companies and has saved ICO Global Communications, turned down Iridium's invite to bring them out of this hole that they put themselves
We
in.
believe that there are a few things Iridium could have done better. The first thing is they could have had a better marketing strategy. They relied too much on outside consultants for assistance. $140 million advertising campaign, but their message wasn't clear. Iridium's ability to communicate anytime, anywhere had specific limitations. One thing was it wasn't designed to work in a dense urban location. So we would have made the message more clear. The second thing is we would have improved sales training. Sales personnel were not properly trained, and they also had a shortage of phones, which meant prospective customers were unable to try the product prior to purchase. So we would allocate more funding to, better sales training. So we got a couple more things here. Another thing we'd have done differently is handle distribution differently. Iridium, they left the distribution to its regional partners, companies such as Sprint, which own 3.5% of Iridium, but they weren't selling the phones or service before the launch of the new system. You can see where that could be a problem. So we would have picked a different distributor. And the final thing we would have done is more testing. Service problems resulted because of lack of testing, led some observers to conclude that the system was prematurely turned on. So we would have definitely dedicated more time to developing and running high quality tests. The current version of Iridium satellite phones actually allow you to test to see if your phone is working. You can find these instructions on iridium.com.
So eventually, more so like an aftermath of everything, Iridium was tasked by Motorola to bring the satellites back down to the atmosphere. It was a 2-year widespread project, costing them up to around 30 to 50 billion. They were but the satellites themselves, they remained operational. They ended up remaining in orbit. The remaining users on Iridium's network, they were bought out by Orbit Call, and due to their extreme efforts, Whoever was on the Iridium network, they didn't go like completely out of service. They were actually um, they were on the orbit call service. So with Motorola backing out, Iridium taking all of these hits left and right, whoever was on the Iridium network was saved. Um, Iridium's legal stretch, their assets were bought out by Iridium's previous CEO, Ed Stano, and Pan Am Airline CEO, previous Pan Am Airline CEO, Dan Colucci, with a price tag of 25 million. Throughout it all, the Department of Defense, they still believed in Iridium, like more like their mission. Uh, and after their new ownership granted them an award of 72 million, around 72 million. The Department of Defense reasoning behind the award is that they really believed in the face of technology and the potential technological revolution that Iridium was capable of providing to the world. Whereas it was a base of like a lot of things, whether it was the global signals, the strengthening of the satellites, communication, that was a very important one as well. Secure communication, telecommunication. There was a very, very, very large part in Iridium's renewal in the world. So they were given some sort of grace, some sort of mercy by the Department of Defense, thankfully due to the new owners of Iridium.